Hi, my name is Kate Mallard and I am here today with Andy Greenaway to talk about his new book, The Bomb Man. Hi Andy, welcome. How are you?
I'm very good, Kate. Thank you for doing this for us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's really exciting to hear. Please tell us about the story. What is The Bomb Man about?
So it's based on my father's time in Northern Ireland in 1973. And my father was a bomb disposal guy. And he went there at the height of the Troubles. So 72 was bad, 73 was even worse. And I think by the end of that year, there was 1,000 bombs went off throughout Northern Ireland. The book's a novel, but it's based on real events. And the reason I wanted to make a novel was that there's a lot of sensitivity about some of the characters and about stuff that happened. And also there's been historical books written about bomb disposal before. So I wanted to give it much more of a depth and emotional connection. And I could do that better through a novel than rather than writing a kind of a biography or a historical version of the thing.
In the story, we visit Staff Sergeant Thomson,
Yeah.
and he is just about to head off to Ireland. What happens? What awaits him there? What do we see the journey that he goes on?
So these guys, they were called ammunition technicians, ATs. So they were into logistics of ammunition and inspecting it, making sure it's all safe. They weren't really trained to be bomb disposal experts. So these guys were thrust into a conflict which they weren't prepared for. So when a lot of them were sent originally to Northern Ireland, a lot of them got killed because they didn't have the techniques, they didn't understand what was going on in terms of how the IRA were evolving their campaigns and their bombs and their technology. So that journey, when he first gets kind of, the order to go to Northern Ireland, I try and kind of reveal the emotion about, would this be the last time I see my wife and about my kids? There's a lot of guys getting killed over there, and I don't want to leave my wife and kids just now. And so I try and capture that at the beginning of the book.
And he arrives in Ireland, and there's kind of three key factors at play here. We've got special branch,
Yeah.
And of course we've got the IRA. And I'd love to hear more about what's going on with these three. What's the plot of the story?
Okay, so you got to remember as well that a lot of the stuff that I write about is from my father's mouth. So the IRA, of course, they're a major part of the book because they're the antagonists, they're the enemy. But also, I remember him telling me quite often that the special branch used to come along, and they come along because they've got moles and touts within the IRA, and they have intelligence of what's coming from America and what new technology is coming. Like, and now a shipment of mercury tilts has come through, so you've got to watch out for those types of bombs. And so I thought, actually, that third pillar in terms of the communities would be a nice thing to add into the book. So it's not just the British Army against the IRA. You've got the special branch, who are mostly Protestants, the IRA, who are mostly Catholic, and then you've got the army, which were agnostic. They didn't really care about religion. But that interplay between the three, I think is quite interesting. It gets quite complex, but quite rewarding at the end of the book. Because also then you've got relationships between the special branch and people inside the IRA. You've got moles and people informing on what's going on. And so that gets relayed back in a bit of a loop throughout the book and creates a nice tension at certain points.
And it's actually something I want to talk about is, there are a couple of kind of really strong themes in this book. And one of them is about heroism and how, in fact, it's actually not, it's like the last thing a bomb disposal person needs. Tell us a bit more about why you chose not to kind of praise heroic events or heroic attitudes.
Yeah, so it's interesting because there was a lot of bravado amongst the ATs, the bomb disposal guys, at the beginning of the conflict. And it got to a stage where so many of them were dying that the army were going, there's something going on here. It's not just, the IRA planting booby traps and stuff. And there was a belief that maybe some ATs were being too bravado and maybe even like dying by suicide by bomb, if you like. And so they started introducing psychology tests. And I write about that in the book. And they bring somebody in from a university and they have this medical officer there, and they all have to do these multiple choice questionnaires. And at the end of one of those sessions, I think out of about 26 people, 8 of them didn't qualify to go to Northern Ireland.
Wow.
Because there was something mentally wasn't right for that job, whether it was anxiety or whether there's too much bravado or whatever. So in the book, there's a major character in there who dies quite early on. He was already in Ireland before they started doing the psychology tests. And I think if he had been subjected to the psychology test, he would have made it through. But he was a very bravado guy. So this whole thing about courage and caution, to your point, courage is normally seen as bravado and putting your front foot forward and going for it, right? That's courage.
Running into the burning building.
Yeah. But in the bomb disposal world, that was just a stupid thing to do. So actually caution and taking your time and having patience was what the game is all about. So the idea of bravery of this gung-ho guy running forward that you see in all the Hollywood movies compared to these guys who say, no, I'm going to sit back for 2.5 hours and let this thing soak.
And what's kind of interesting is we always see in Hollywood this like sense of a clock ticking down and you've got to make a decision quickly. So it's really lovely to hear that this other, that kind of maybe a more realistic kind of what they experience.
Yeah, no, I think it was. Look, a building gets blown up, it's a building, it costs a lot of money. That's better than a person being blown up.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of thing, right? Yeah, we're not going to risk a life to save a building. We're going to sacrifice the building to save a life.
Yeah. In the book, we see this kind of sense of like, to survive bomb disposal, you need to follow procedure. You need to be self-controlled and stick by the rules. But to win the war or the battle, you need to not do things by the book. And that's the story we see, like how they challenge the IRA thinking by not necessarily following army protocol.
Yes.
So I want to find a bit more about why you chose to touch on that tension.
Well, I mean, there's obviously there's a story arc of my father, a soldier that played it by the rules, adhered strictly to, convention. And by the end, he's torn a few pages out of the book and thrown them away. So there's a few stories in there which were interesting. He did play it by the book because he knew that those techniques and those protocols would save his life and others' lives. But there are a few times where you come across a bomb where you're going, am I going to survive this? Because it's not a clock bomb. It's probably a mercury tilt. I can't get my robot in there to destroy it, so I have to go in there and use my hands. What do I do? So there's one particular story which he never told me, but it's the inciting point in the book, is where they catch a bomb maker planting a bomb. And after a bit of interrogation and some encouragement from the special branch guy, they decide to put a detonating cord around his neck and get him to dispose his own bomb. So I didn't hear that from my father. I heard it actually at his funeral. So I was at the funeral and he told a lot of his friends about me writing this book. And one of his friends says, did your dad ever tell you the time he puts a detonating cord around a terrorist's neck? I said, no, he didn't. But funnily enough, I'd been kind of struggling with the inciting point in the book, and that became the inciting point. That's when it really pisses the IRA off. And instead of just attacking the army as one mass kind of thing, they went after an individual. So that's how I kind of created that tension in the book. But also, talking to my dad, in real life, they did actually go after him individually as well. He disposed so many bombs in his 4-month tour, something like about 30 explosive devices. And I think they were getting a bit frustrated that their clever little bombs weren't killing people, and he was kind of diffusing them. So the special branch came to him and said, look, they're going after you personally. So they started laying bombs to try and get him killed and blown up. And so those bombs weren't easy bombs. They were either radio controlled or they're mercury tilts. But that inciting moment actually helped kind of create that ignition, that spark that makes them go, right, we're going to get you. We're going to get you personally.
And there are some, like going back to that, making the bomb maker detonate his own bomb. There are like some real great moments of humour throughout the book.
Yeah.
Some of it is dark or darker, and obviously the humour is in the context of what was going on at the time. Why did you think it's important to include these kind of moments of levity?
Yeah, I think when human beings and soldiers are put under extreme stress, they have to vent a bit, right? And I think humour is a great way to diffuse tension and anxiety. And there's obviously a nice play on words there, diffuse, tension, anxiety, but you're diffusing bombs as well. I know it's a different word, but when I was young and growing up with all these guys, especially if you're in somewhere like Kyneton, which was the central ammunition depot, all those guys that used to come around to our house for drinks and parties and coffees and stuff, they're all bomb disposal guys. Now, I always thought they weren't like normal soldiers. They weren't physically fit. A lot of them were quite fat and unfit.
Yeah.
And that's not true of all of them. One of my dad's close friends was a very good rugby player. But they weren't your classically athletic soldier.
G.I. Joe?
Yeah, they weren't the G.I. Joe. They were more brain than brawn. They were intelligent people, and they had an intelligent sense of humour, and quite often that humour was dark. And I suppose actually I've got a dark sense of humour because I grew up around it all my life. So it was actually easy for me to kind of inject that into the book.
Moving on to obviously someone who plays an important role in the book is Jimmy Brett, who is the commander of the IRA in Londonderry. And I just kind of wanted to get a feel for what was kind of the backstory to him and the people he was associated with, in particular like the bomb maker Curly.
All the IRA side of it that I've written about, it's all fiction. But I've read an awful lot of very good books about the Troubles from both sides, and also from undercover people as well, who kind of were working for the military in the special branch. So I got a sense that obviously these guys got into it originally because it was political. The Catholics in Northern Ireland were under the thumb. They were treated very unfairly. There was social injustice, there was religious bigotry. And I think some people became twisted as a result of that. So when they started the war, when they got involved in the conflict, they may have started off with good intentions, but I think they kind of morphed and evolved into something else. He's someone who's risen to the top, and you don't get to the top of an organisation like that unless you're prepared to do nasty things, unless you're prepared to kill women and children and police officers and soldiers. So there is a kind of bit of a psychopathy about him. Maybe that kind of came out of seeing so much violence that it became a normal thing. But he's political. He's there for the cause, but he's prepared to do anything to make sure that the cause advances, including doing horrendous things. So yeah, he's an interesting character, completely made up. But there are mirrors of stuff about people I've read in some historical books as well. So it feels like he's authentic. And then there's a guy called Curly Coyle. And throughout the whole book, I've used alternative names, especially on the army side, because I didn't want to cause any family distress with their loved ones being in the book. But Curly Coyle was someone who kept on coming up in my dad's stories. And Curly Coyle was the chief bomb maker of Londonderry. And I Googled him on several occasions, and I could never find anything about Curly Coyle. You could find stuff about McGuinness, about Lenny Murphy. Lenny Murphy was the leader of the Shankill Butchers, and he eventually got convicted for killing people. So you can find stuff on Wikipedia and stuff about these people. I couldn't find anything about Curly Coyle.
That's interesting.
But this is one of these guys that kept on coming through in my dad's stories. He was the guy that went after my dad personally. And so he's the only one where I've actually left the name. One, because I can't find him anywhere else, so maybe he's fictitious, but I doubt it. I don't even know if he's still alive. So if he reads this book, maybe he'll give me a call, I don't know. So yeah, he's an interesting one as well, because in the book, he doesn't come across as a psychopath. We tell the story of him managing to get to university, getting a good job at DuPont. DuPont was there in those days and probably thought this whole thing was madness. Yeah. But he leaves because of the Battle of the Bogside. And he sees his community under direct threat from the Orangemen and potentially the B Specials and also the police. So there's a massive social injustice, and the army come in, and very few people realize that when the army came in, all the women were given cups of tea and biscuits, and they welcomed the British army because they'd stopped them from being attacked. But there was a deep cynicism because of the history between England specifically and Ireland. Yeah. So there's a cynicism that actually, something that they're not really on our side, and they never have been. And so Curly Coyle kind of joins the cause because he says, enough's enough. Yeah. You've downtrodden my people. You want to burn us out of our homes. You want to push us out of the country, and we're not having it. So he kills people. He makes bombs. but he's not got the same psychopathy as Jimmy Brett. Or there's another character in there called Liam Mamani, who's a complete nutcase, and you can just see that he's a complete psychopath.
Yeah.
But some people joined it because they really did have a belief that this was the right thing to do. So I kind of give that sentiment. He's still a bad guy.
Yeah.
But what I do, I give the reasons why he became that person and why he was doing this stuff.
That kind of brings us into a nice discussion around like why write this book in the first place, and how did it come about, and what was it like writing a story about essentially your father's work?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, he never really talked about, like a lot of these old soldiers, they never really talk about the troubles or their wars, whatever they do. Partly they probably don't think the kids are going to be interested, they're too young and whatever. So it was only later on in life where, he's come out to Singapore a lot. I used to go to Cannes every year for the Cannes Advertising Festival, and he'd come along and meet all my friends. And then they'd start asking him, "Oh, you're a bomb disposal guy, what happened?" And suddenly all these stories started coming out. And then Curly Coyle and all sorts of stuff started coming out. So I started probing more as well and asking him, tell me more. Then he started getting invited onto documentary programs. So there was one done by the History Channel, there's another one by ITV, and then the very final one he did before he passed away was for BBC Northern Ireland. And that one he played a very pivotal part in. So they took 3 guys, ex-bomb disposal experts, and they took them back to Ireland to talk about the bombs that they did. And he became quite well known because he told a story about one very sunny day. Apparently Northern Ireland doesn't have much good weather. There's one sunny day when people were ripping off their shirts, the sun was out, and he was shooting at a parcel with a shotgun in the middle of the road. And every time he shot the parcel, the crowd started going, "Nice one, Cyril, nice one, son, nice one, Cyril, let's have another one." So he'd shoot again, and they'd do the same thing over again. And eventually he was shooting shot in the air. And but he talks about this story on the documentary, and people remember that. It was a very iconic moment. I didn't put it in the book because it didn't fit neatly into the plot. But I said to him, I said, "Dad, you've got these amazing stories, and when you go, these stories will be lost. And I think they're just too important not to get them down on paper for posterity and for people to remember and learn from in the future." So that's when I said to him, I want to write a book about it. And then we kind of worked on it. Every time I wrote a chapter, I'd send him the chapter to read. And then I asked a lot of stuff about technology.
Yeah.
Describing the technology was really, really difficult. But I managed to do it by talking to my dad, and then he's talking to friends and getting information where there were gaps. And so actually, again, the technology is quite interesting and authentic. And one of the things that's really interesting for people when they read the book, one of their main tools was the hook and line. So the hook and line is basically a grappling hook and 200 meters of rope. And they'd walk up to a parcel, a suspect parcel.
Yeah.
You don't know if it's going to be real or not. And they put it into the parcel, and they walk back and they give it a good tug. And if it goes off, then it's real. If it doesn't go off, if they pull it out of the boot, for instance, then it's on the road. Then they can actually shoot it with a shotgun or a disruptor of some sort and just blast it away.
Actually, that was one of the things that I found quite astonishing about the story, was kind of how rudimentary some of the bombs were, but also just how the British always seemed to be quite far behind what was going on. It was almost like Northern Ireland the IRA were innovating all the time on what kind of ammunition they should be using.
Yeah, there was an arms race basically. So when the army learned how to deal with one kind of bomb, then the IRA would innovate and move on to another level. So then they went to clock bombs, then they went to mercury tilts, and I think at one point they went to light-sensitive bombs. So if an ammunition technician is going in the dark looking for a bomb and he puts his flashlight on the bomb, then the bomb will go off. So very, very tricky stuff.
Yeah.
But the problem is it's so tricky that the IRA started blowing themselves up. So eventually they went back to kind of the good old, sturdy, safe clock bombs and moved away from the sophisticated stuff because it's just too deadly for themselves as it was for the 80s as well.
Do you see any echoes, or do you think your father would see any echoes in the war in Afghanistan and how that was fought with roadside bombs and suicide bombers, and what was going on in Ireland?
Yeah, I'm sure. He used to talk about how it all changed. When my dad was in Northern Ireland, they had an escort, so they had 4 soldiers from the infantry to protect them from snipers and just scouting and making sure that they're protected. In Afghanistan, the modern day ammunition technician basically picks up a gun with his escort and he fights in to the area where the bomb is.
Wow.
Then he does his work and then he picks up a gun and he fights coming out. So the guys in Northern Ireland, they had pistols, but they didn't use them. They didn't feel comfortable using their pistols. They weren't kind of infantry soldiers, they were bomb disposal soldiers. So it was different. I think the modern day ATs are more well-rounded. They're soldier and bomb disposal expert.
Unfortunately, you shared that your father has since passed away. What do you think he would think about the book? Did he ever get a chance to read it?
As I said earlier, we worked on it together, sort of. I was writing it and then I'd send it to him and then he'd give corrections on what happened or he'd give commentary on the technology. So he managed to get through the first draft, and he was proud. He was very proud of it. He was telling his friends that my son's writing this book and they were kind of giving him support and whatever. So yeah, I think he would have been very excited. Since he passed away, I've done a multitude of rewrites and edits and drafts. I reckon I've done about 21 drafts all in all. So a lot of the themes are the same, a lot of the stories are the same, but the book and the plot is very, very different from the very last version that he read. And as a writer, I had lots of people saying, you can be melodramatic, right? You can go off here and there, whatever. And I tried that. And then I felt a discomfort with it because I was losing the authenticity and the reality of it. So I wanted to put it right back, take out the melodrama and keep it as real as possible. So in the book, every single bomb incident in that book is based on a real event, except for one, because it is a novel, so the final explosion isn't a real one. And I'm not going to give away the story and the ending, but actually that's how close to real events it was. Every single bomb in there, apart from one, was actually based on a real incident. And then obviously I've had to make up the stuff around the IRA men and the special branch, but it kind of works with the key theme, which is driven by this bomb disposal man and his life in Northern Ireland for 4 months.
Yeah.
So I think he'd have been very supportive of me, opening a door into why it happened. These terrorists just didn't come out of nowhere. There was a reason why they came out of the woodwork and why they formed this cause. And they had massive support from their communities for a very long time.
And what would you personally like people to take away from the book?
There's a lot of, I didn't want it to be Hollywood. There's a lot of stuff around, my father used to spoil all the movies when I was a kid where there was bombs. And they're about to cut the red wire or the blue wire. And he'd go, rubbish, they don't do that. I said, Dad, I'm trying to watch a film. And he said, well, why would they color code their work? They don't buy blue and red wire, they buy black wire. They buy the colour black wire, so when you see a bomb, it's all black wire. There's no giveaway telltale signs about the red, blue or yellow, right? But what I want to get across is that no one's written about these guys before. And cause I think somehow in people's minds, bomb disposal, it's dramatic when a bomb goes off. But actually it's not as exciting as an SES guy, going undercover and running around and jumping over fences and escaping and all that sort of stuff, right? So there are a couple of things I wanted to achieve. One, it's actually a fascinating story. And the book itself is a page turner, I think. And it's thrilling and there's twists and turns. Also, I think, as I said before, no one writes about these guys because it's not interesting enough. So I wanted to make them interesting because these guys weren't trained and they weren't prepared for this conflict.
Yeah.
They were just thrust into it. It's like, right, you're an AT, now you're a bomb disposal guy. Just go and do it.
Right.
And so that in itself is fascinating, right? These guys learned on the job. I'm in advertising. I can learn on the job in advertising. It's relatively safe. Yeah. Learning on the job as a bomb disposal man, wow, okay. And that's why so many of them got killed. So I just think it's a part of the British Army no one's really covered off in depth. This actually brings the whole thing alive. It brings out the emotions, it brings out the anxiety, it brings out the inner thoughts of when you're walking towards that bomb. You know, they call it the long walk. Because yeah, I mean, when you're in battle, you can run and you can shoot and your adrenaline's going. But knowing there's a bomb over there that can be radio controlled and you've got to walk to it very, very slowly. And then once you're there, then you've got to open up a boot, make sure it's not booby-trapped, put your hook in and walk back. It's called the long walk. And it's not a long walk, it's only 200 meters. But it feels like a long walk because it must be extremely stressful. And you're thinking in your mind, am I going to die? Is it going to go off? Put it to the back of your mind. Is this your job? Get on with it. But will I see my kids? Will I see my wife? Or will I be blown up today? So it's a fascinating, psychologically, it's a very fascinating area. It's slow and patient and full of tension and stress. It's very different from your normal kind of military story where it's all about adrenaline and guns going and people throwing grenades. It's very different. It's kind of an antithesis to it almost. So I wanted to make sure as well that it wasn't Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood could make it, and if you get the right director, it'd be a great film, but it's not Hollywood. It's a very different kind of military story, but nonetheless, still equally exciting, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I thoroughly enjoyed the read, so thank you so much for spending this time with me today.
Kate, thank you for coming on and giving me this talk and allowing me the opportunity to tell everybody about this book.
Incredible book. For all of you who've enjoyed hearing Andy's story, please go to Amazon where you can find The Bomb Man by Andy Greenaway. It's a fantastic read. Thank you.